Hey y'all, welcome back to Things You Ought to Know. I'm your podcast host, Kelby Finati, and today's going to look a little different, sound a little different, just for the intro though. To be honest with you, we forgot to record an intro when we were recording with our guest. And you heard me right, we do have a guest today. We told you we would be sprinkling in some people that we really think have some great things that you ought to know about, and today's going to be one that you don't want to miss. So we're very excited to welcome Tiffany. She is with InBloom Advocacy. She's amazing at what she does, and we have through so much nuggets of information throughout this conversation. We are really excited to be able to bring Tiffany back and continue the conversation because, again, so much information that we didn't have time to record it all. So if you listen to this and have any questions for her that you would like answered on our next podcast, please go ahead and just send those over to us in our Facebook group message or put those over in our any social platforms on our comment section. But we'll go ahead and dive in, y'all. This is Tiffany with InBloom Advocacy. All right. We are excited to have Tiffany Yandle on the podcast today. I originally got plugged in with Tiffany because she is a very big part of ABS Kids, and that's how I got plugged in with Tiffany originally. And I've also seen her in the chatter with InBloom Advocacy. She is the owner of InBloom Advocacy, and I've seen her heavily on Facebook mom pages, and I'm so thankful because you have been able to give a wealth of knowledge to that family. And I was like, we have to have her on the podcast. She has so many things that people ought to know about. So welcome, Tiffany. If you can kind of let us know who you are and a little bit about your background, and then we'll dive into a few questions with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I am first and foremost a mom of 4. And so they keep my schedule super busy. So I know you guys can relate. And then additionally, I started my career as a special education teacher, working with all children, and then had a really big impact with a kiddo with autism, fell in love, became an autism specialist. I think it's really cool for some reason to go back to school and get all the degrees and letters because I don't know why. And so I'm actually a candidate right now for my doctorate in special education. I have a year left. And, but I am the director of business development for ABS Kids here in North Carolina. So I'm based right outside of Charlotte, but I support across the state. And then I'm also the founder and president of InBloom Advocacy, and we do special education advocacy as well as serving families and training professionals on how to work with the neurodivergent population in general. And so we do a lot of different services. We very much want to be whatever the community needs us to be to make a difference for our kiddos with disabilities. And then prior to starting these roles, I was a special education teacher and then moved into school administration. I always had this passion for, if I climb the corporate ladder, I will be able to make more and more of a difference. Well, as I climbed the education ladder, I realized my hands were tied a lot. And we can dive into that at some point if you want to. But I had kept hitting the same red tape that parents were hitting and that community members were hitting. And I was supposed to represent something I didn't believe in. And so I then said, I'm taking a huge leap of faith. I'm out of here. I still love the public education system, but I now sit on the other side of the table to make a difference. And so that's kind of the space I live in now.
Awesome. I have my first question for you related to the ABS Kids, how you got plugged in with them. Did you have prior knowledge to the world of ABA therapy that told you when you saw the job, opportunity come through, you're like, that's where I can make an impact? I'm just curious because a lot of people, as we know, it can be a 50-50 controversial topic. So I'm curious what your, perception of it walking into it to where you are now in the company.
Sure. So I actually had no intention on getting another job. I just wanted to grow InBloom Advocacy, but I always was in the community and plugged in. I firmly believe in ABA therapy, and so I would refer clients to ABA therapy companies. I actually was at an event that ABS Kids was hosting and was there for InBloom Advocacy and met one of their vice presidents, and he was like, so, hey, if you know anyone in the area, we're looking for this role. And then like 30 minutes later, I was like, wait. I know someone.
She's this really awesome person.
Tell you about her. So as I spent time with their team and spent time in their facility, I just was like, I believe in this organization. To me, it felt different than other ABA companies that I had plugged into. And so I was like, yeah, I want to be part of this too. And it did broaden my reach and my ability to make an impact. And that's what I think I'm here on the planet to do. And so, so that's kind of how I plugged into ABS Kids. I've been with ABS Kids for a little over a year now and have really grown the organization and continue to grow the organization. But what I love is that it's ABA therapy, which is great, but it's also community support. It's wraparound support. It's community events. I get to play in all the fun events. That's my favorite part of my job. And so to me, that is where I'm like, I'm giving back to the Carolinas and the community that I live in and the autism community.
That's awesome. Yeah. And one thing I want to point out, just that we have noticed, like from my office.
Parker, sorry. I'll let you keep going the question.
Yep. One thing I've noticed with ABS that I just want to touch on really fast that has been such a big support for my patient population at Tri-County is that they also have diagnostic services there. And like Dr. Jones, the lead psychologist there, has just grown that, department wildly. And that's been a huge support for me as somebody who's, a diagnostician, as well as just having other resources, because wait lists just are growing. And so we're stopping that roadblock. And then you guys came across to South Carolina and opened up 4 locations.
And we're now up to 10 in South Carolina.
10, woo! Yes. So right here in York County, there was 2 in Fort Mill initially and 2 in Rock Hill.
And that's still the same. And then we've grown in Columbia and Greenville.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been great because we've been able to literally say, oh, not only are you going to get this diagnosis sooner, we're going to be able to send you somewhere and get you an ABA therapy pretty quickly, which is just unheard of until you guys came into the picture.
Yeah, and I'm actually doing almost kind of weekly interviews just with ABA facilities, learning their model and what they have available, and that just plugs me into the Autism Strong side of things. But what I have learned is that there's not a lot of people that have your model where they have an on-site psychologist, right? That's what Dr. Jones is. And being able to just plug them in for that assessment and mitigate that waiting time, because how many times have we seen family where it's like, I'm on an 18-month wait list. I have the diagnosis, but what do I do now? And it's like, you're closing that gap on the what do you do now. So thank you. I think it's a beautiful model. It needs to be replicated more and more.
We're trying really hard. And we're across 5 states, which, so for listeners that aren't in the Carolinas, we're in Tennessee, California, and Utah as well with the same model. And Dr. Jones is our director of clinical psychology. So he supports across those states. And then we have psychologists in each of our regions. So we actually have a psychologist in York, right there in Rock Hill, and then again in Columbia, and one's about to start in Greenville. So for South Carolina, we have 20 plus locations in North Carolina. So it's insane. That's really what Dr. Jones' passion is closing that gap for early intervention, getting people that diagnosis, and then, like you said, offering them the door for services more quickly is the goal.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to kind of shout that out because that's from my end. That's something that has been a very good gap closer for us as well.
I appreciate you sharing that. We love to hear the good news.
I was just going to say, keep it up because we really need it. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
On the InBloom side, can you kind of let us know a little bit of how you got that off the ground? When did it start and where are you at now with it?
Sure. So I took the leap of faith in April of 2022. It is a nonprofit, federal nonprofit. And so we started just supporting families in North Carolina and then quickly saw the need across the Southeast. So we are now supporting families from Virginia to Florida across the Southeastern states on navigating any type of support that their kid may need. So it may be that they need interventions. It may need that they need the Section 504 level of accommodation support, or all the way up into getting eligible or developing an IEP. And so I support families, and it looks very different for every family. It's very individualized, as it should be. And so I can go do observations of their kiddos in schools. I attend and sit at meetings with them with schools to try to break down those barriers of intimidation. I can go to the point of if we ever had to file state complaints, whatever that kind of looks like. I try really hard to take a collaborative approach to advocacy because I think it gets the child what they need quicker. And that's my goal, is I want them to have what they need as tomorrow, as soon as possible. And then I also provide professional training. So I speak nationally on parents' rights and responsibilities, on autism, on all sorts of topics. And then I also provide professional development when organizations ask me to. So maybe those are preschools or private schools or other organizations, as well as businesses. How do I, a lot of businesses will come to me and say, how do we make a more inclusive space? How do we talk with people with neurodivergency? And so I can come in and do trainings and things like that in that space as well.
I was saying that's amazing, because that really plugs into our mission of this podcast, is one, to, provide a judgment-free platform to kind of tell people or learn about things that we ought to know. But also it's to get that community outreach and to help go into, we've talked so much, like we brainstorm all the time, but like restaurants, like how do we get everybody, like every place that you walk into to be inclusive and, neurodivergent friendly. So that's really cool that, your mission is very similar, and you've just grown this so much. And now you're not just in like York County or South Carolina or North Carolina, you're national. So that's really awesome.
And I know the private school sector is very different. They don't have to follow the IEP, correct? Am I saying that correctly?
Yes. And it's all because of funding. So private schools don't receive state or federal funding, so they're not legally mandated by the same laws.
But do you ever see a need for still advocacy, like for InBloom within the private school setting as well?
I do. I support families. It doesn't matter what educational setting they're in, all the way from age 3 to 21. So preschools, private schools, public schools, charter schools, it doesn't matter to me. Because even if they are in a private sector, there are still laws and regulations that protect people with medical and physical disabilities, regardless if it's under the IEP umbrella. So there are still protections and expectations legally as just basic civil rights that are still expected. And actually, a lot of private schools, I've been shocked, are a lot more flexible and accommodating than one would think.
Yeah. We're exploring schooling options right now for Porter, and we, public school versus private school is kind of a big up in the air for us. We are leaning more on the private side just for his specific needs. This specific school has better resources available to him, but that's from, just a personal experience. I have been able to ask that question, like, if I need an advocate, I hope I don't, but if I were to need one, and what does that look like? What does that relationship look like? And most all of them have been very open to it, which is a good, why not? Which kind of leads me into another question of, is there kind of because in healthcare we call it like preventative measures. Do you have kind of like preventative measures for advocacy that you, like, should a parent get plugged in with you early before they have a problem? Okay.
I think you would. It's easier to solve the problem or to prevent the problem than to solve it.
So I typically I'm getting the call once parents are like, I'm throwing my hands up, I don't know what else to do. But part of my mission and part of the reason I will go speak at parent nights. Like last podcast, you guys were talking about throwing together Kelby was like, I'm saving the world.
We're still on it, Tiffany, and so I'm all telling you, don't.
Let me just tell you, when she volunteers, it happens.
You have to have it.
I'm here for it because, and actually, I'm going to shamelessly plug myself, an event that I'm hosting quarterly now at Biddy and Bose in Charlotte. So anyone's welcome to come, completely free. It's called Ask the Professional. And so parents can come, bring your kids if you want to, at Biddy and Bose in Charlotte once a quarter. Our next one is March 22nd with actually Dr. Andrew Jones. He's going to talk, and parents can come ask the psychologist. And then we will have one each quarter. It's all over social media already, but each quarter. So this year we have already scheduled Ask the Psychologist, Ask the Advocate, which will be me. And then in September is Ask the Attorney. And Keith Howard will be coming for parents to just ask those questions that they want answered. And I'm doing that, like you said, for preventative. I want parents to understand they have rights and they can ask the questions, and they don't just have to listen to the answer no. There is a way to do that. So I tell parents as soon as they're 3, call and let's get them go. Even if you're going to go the private school route, even if you're going to homeschool, I don't care what you're going to do. We need to get them an IEP so that if you ever go into a school, a charter or public school, they're protected. And then if you live in North Carolina and you have an IEP, I think you may live in North Carolina. If you have an IEP, no matter their age, you're eligible then for the ESA opportunity grants, which help you pay for alternative schooling options. And so even if that's not your intent, it is still their legal mandate to work through that eligibility process, regardless if you're an enrolled student yet or not.
I actually just had a conversation with someone who's going to be at the Connect Strong conference in Charlotte on the 29th, but she is a principal at a local school in North Carolina, and she was also a special needs mom. She said she applies for that ESA grant no matter what, even if she decides to do the private school sector, but every year she's been granted it, whether she utilizes it or not. So she was just really encouraging. I'm actually over on the state line. I'm in South Carolina, but I do know that there is something similar to that, but not the ESA grant. You probably know way more than I do on that, but South Carolina also has something to assist, right?
They do. South Carolina, and I'm not as familiar as of their timelines and their deadlines and their requirements, but I know that they have funding availability for alternative education models. And so I dig into that, and I share on my website like resources and connections. Actually, the ESA and Opportunity Grant application ends March 6th. And so it's kind of too late this year, sadly, for a lot of families who are maybe just now.
Oh,
it's today.
Yeah, it's today.
Yeah.
So, we can push something out there. If you have any information, maybe we can just put it on our social media today.
Yeah, I actually posted in all the local mom groups yesterday a reminder, like, hey, don't forget to apply. It's about to end.
See, told you. I see InBloom in there all the time.
Like I said, my goal is to make sure people know, because
they don't know.
They ought to know, right?
They ought to know. Yes.
It does. It gets like hidden behind all these doors. It's like open one door and there's a few supports, and then you have to like keep like going down this like dark tunnel hallway, open up another door, and it almost feels like it's made to be that way. And
sadly, it is. It's all driven by money.
Yeah.
Sadly, that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, but there are, so like Kelby, yes, families, if you have a child with a disability of any sort, call an advocate, whether that's me or someone else in your community, as soon as you know your child's going to need something different in the school system. And if we can be proactive, then we never have to get reactive.
Yeah, that's and my previous career in healthcare management, that was always our goal at the end of the day, was to be proactive rather than reactive. And so it seems like it's pretty plug and play with a lot of these different situations in life as well.
Yeah. One thing that you were saying is like that you want parents to know that in an IEP meeting or a 504 meeting, they have rights. I tell parents all the time, I'm like, you actually have more rights than the school a lot of times. But I know that working especially with like my population, which is a high Medicaid population. And so, they may not have, certain levels of education, things like that. And so they get really intimidated. They walk into a meeting, it's like one of them, because a lot of times it's a single parent or grandma or, something. And there's like 4 or 5 people from the school, and it's just very intimidating. And they just start throwing around, all this highly educated jargon and all of this. And like the parent is just like, they go in and I'm like, be strong, be strong. And they're like, I just felt myself sinking back into the chair as the meeting went and just agreeing more and more, even though in my head, I'm like, no, like put the brakes on. So yeah, I mean, that's so hard to do, is to get these people or get these parents to be able to keep fighting that, when you're like being told, well, we hear you, but this is how we've been doing it, and it seems to work really well, and you're like, it doesn't work. So if somebody wanted to contact you, one of my patients, how would they go about, like, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
So to answer your question, and I want to touch on something you said, to answer your question, it would be obviously social media. I'm very active on purpose, because that's where people get their news nowadays. So direct message me on any platform. And then also my website, there is a free consultation form you can fill out, and it'll send me an email, and I'll set up a free consultation with any family. And then, so I really don't care. Send a carrier pigeon. I want you to find me, right? And so whatever that looks like for parents, I want it looks different for every parent, and I'm okay with that. My cell phone number is also broadly out there on the internet. So I get texts sometimes, and I'm fine with that. And so, but to touch on what you said, first off, I want to kudos to the parents who walk in the room, because for so many of our parents, they already have a broken relationship with the education system because of their personal experience, probably, that that they're even bold enough to show up to a space that is already uncomfortable for them, kudos. Like, I want to acknowledge that, because I have parents that won't even go to a meeting because they're like, the school is not a safe space for me, so I'm not going there.
They don't even think about that.
That's so fair. Yeah.
And so I just want to like call that out, because so many of our families, especially if they're at that point where they're at an IEP meeting or a 504 meeting, they've gotten 101 calls to come pick their kid up. Everyone calls them and tells them everything's wrong with their kid. And so the fact that they're showing up, I just like want to praise that.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, one of the things I tell parents is never go alone. I don't care if you take your babysitter. I don't care if you take whoever you take with you is now the expert of the child. So think about who spends the most time with your child. Take them with you, because you're going to get emotional. If you're talking about my kid, I'm getting emotional.
Yeah.
I'm an expert in the field. You can't help but stop those emotions when you're talking about your baby.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say, take anybody that knows your child, because those 5 required team members that are going to be at the meeting, we have an expert in specially designed instruction, your special education teacher. You have your local education agency, your LEA, that is your principal or your expert in like admin level supports. You have your general education teacher, that's the expert in the general classroom and content. You are the expert of your child. So if you know that the babysitter or grandma or aunt, I don't care who it is, also is an expert in your child, take them with you, so that you don't feel alone, and so that you don't do exactly what you just described, where you feel like you're just slowly being backed into a corner and you're to the point of you're just agreeing to get out of there.
Yeah.
I have a personal experience with that. I'm a pretty bold person. Like, I will say it, and I will ask the questions, hence why we have a podcast. But I had an experience when we got my son in with the public school outside of Boston, Massachusetts, when we lived up there. Amazing resources, pretty much anything we wanted given to us at our fingertips. Obviously, funding is flooded into that state, so they had it to be able to give to us. But I still felt myself feeling intimidated. It was post-COVID, so we weren't in person. It was a Zoom meeting for all of them, and we moved from school districts in that time period. So from one experience to another was vastly different based off the team that they provided to support on that call. And so I would say, like, when Michael, my husband, was able to join me on some of those, I felt more confident just innately having someone in my corner. So your recommendation, inadvertently, I did it, but I didn't even realize that it helped me so much. I second that absolutely from just personal experience. It will, just anybody. And I'm
curious. I want the street walking with an entourage.
And I want to
match your 5 people.
Do it.
Right? Like, this person is my gardener. But
and that is a here with the that parents don't know. Parents do not have to notify the school who they're bringing. Parents can walk into any.
That was my question. Okay. I was told I had to notify them.
So the school. So here's the big thing within the IDEA law. Is that the school has to notify the parent via an invitation 7 to 10 days before the meeting who will be in the meeting. So I say to parents, if you on your invitation did not know there was going to be 9 people, you thought it was just going to be the 4 required school members and yourself, you can walk into that meeting and say, no, we're not having this because you did not tell me 85 people were going to be here. But the parent has more rights, like Erica was talking about. They can bring whoever they want, and they do not have to notify the school. The only time that caveat is met is if you're bringing an attorney. If you bring an advocate, you can bring anybody, but if you bring an attorney, the school has to also have an attorney, so that has to be notified in advance. Other than that role, you can bring anybody you want.
Okay.
I'm not recommending this, but I'm just curious if you would recommend. Is there any benefit to not telling them if you're bringing an advocate so that they are not so much on the defense when they are, walking into the meeting?
So it depends on the situation, to be honest. Schools that are doing inadvertently wrong things to kids, to be blunt, I wouldn't tell them, because they're going to then cover their butt and they're going to figure out a way to hide, because those people know what they're doing is not appropriate. So they're going to find a way to cover themselves up. And so in those situations, I don't. If we're coming in proactively and we're trying to really take a collaborative, proactive approach, then I think it's okay to say, hey, my advocate's coming with me. These are the things we want to talk about. These are my concerns. But I think it's very situational. And I tell parents that. I say, if you want to let them know I'm going to be there, let them know. If you want to copy me on every single email, I don't care. If you don't, because you want to wait till we're at the table and kind of catch them in their lies, then let's take that approach too. So it kind of depends on the situation and what's been happening and the relationship between the school and the parent already. If that relationship's been broken, then we probably need to just come together.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the
being a
best
little
way to go about it.
Tactful about it, I guess.
Yeah.
I was wondering, for people who aren't yet in this stage of life, or are past it and maybe don't know all the reasons you could use an advocate in your corner, can you give us both dynamics, an example of the most simplistic case that you were brought in on, and then also somewhat the most complex, obviously without giving
Sure.
any information out about the individual, but would love to hear kind of the difference in the dichotomy of those two and what your experience was with the parent for each of them.
Yeah. So I have parents that'll call me and just say, look, I have a kid with a disability and I have no clue, but I know that it's about time for them to start school. Right. So those are the easy ones where I'm like, okay, here's your options. Depending on your child's level of need, do we just need to look at interventions? Do we need to just look at accommodations through a Section 504 plan? Or do we need to look at, do they meet eligibility criteria for an IEP? And those three plans give very different supports to kids. So it depends on what your kid needs. So we have those discussions, and those are the easy ones where I'm just like, all right, check box, let's do the process, whatever process we're going to go into. Let's do that process. And then the kid gets the plan support they need. They go to school. Life is great. Right. So those are my
proactive ones.
Those are my proactive, like easy ones, right? Where I just get the call where the parent's not already crying and mad.
Mm-hmm.
Then I get the call from the parents who are, ready to burn the school down, and they've done wrong by their kid. They've sent their kid home every day. They've lost their job because they've had to pick their kid up every day. It's impacting everything at this point in their life. In those situations, that's where I have to take a step back, do a full file review. Where have all the wrongdoings? Where did we go wrong? Immediately ask for a meeting. My biggest thing is, if you are having all of these complications with the school and all the pushback and the lack of communication and all of these things that are happening nationwide, sadly, if those things are happening to you, the very first thing you need to do is request a meeting.
How long does the school have to supply you a meeting once a parent or somebody has requested the meeting?
It depends where you're at in which process. So if you're a 504 plan or an IEP plan, ideally they should be scheduling that meeting within 2 to 3 weeks. You get a 7 to 10 day notice as a parent. So now you can waive that. If the school says, oh, well, we have availability tomorrow, you as a parent can say, fine, we'll meet tomorrow. But they are required to give you a 7 to 10 day notice unless you waive that right. But so I would say 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes a month if there's holidays or something in there. So there's no set law that says, oh, I requested a meeting today, they have to do it within this many days. There's just laws around how quickly we have to determine eligibility and the notice time that they give you. So that looks kind of funky, but I would definitely say request a meeting. And then the one thing I tell all of my parents, even if you're not having issues yet, sadly, the reality is, of the 13 years your kids are in school, you're going to have an issue at some point. That's just the sad reality right now in our education system. So I would recommend you put everything in writing, everything. So if the teacher walks your kid out to the car rider line and says, hey, Johnny had a rough day, this happened, follow up in an email, or if you're using like an app, like a lot of schools are using communication apps, things like that, whatever it is, put it in writing. Hey, my understanding today when I picked Johnny up in the car rider line is this, and this happened. Follow up to every phone call, to everything in writing with your understanding of the conversation. And if they don't dispute that, then it becomes, then that's the truth, right? If within a day or two they haven't said, no, I'm sorry, Erica, you misunderstood, this is what happened, then it becomes accepted knowledge, right? And so that is my advice to every parent. Schools will 100% try to do things verbally. It's just the reality of what happens, because then there's no paper trail. And as much as we don't want to come in on the defense as a parent, we want to trust the school. In this day and age, you have to. So you have to everything in writing, any request in writing, any understanding, any conversation, follow up in writing. That's my number one advice, no matter what process you're in, even if you don't even have a kid with a disability. If it's just your teacher's calling to tell you your kid's failing a class.
Yeah. That's great advice.
I was going to
It's
say,
almost like legal. Like, I mean, it really is. It's like what any attorney would tell you.
Yeah.
Make sure it's in writing, but yeah, it's the same for like medical. Like if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Right.
Whether it's defending you or something that you didn't want to happen,
And a specific scenario that I'll give you that happens so frequently, since you talked about scenarios, is I'll have parents that'll say, oh, well, the teacher is doing this with my kid and this with my kid and this with my kid, and they just said that's best practice, so it doesn't have to be documented in their plan, right? But just because Miss Jones is going to do it for us does not mean we go to fourth grade, the next teacher's going to do it, or the next teacher. So that is why it's so important that you have it in writing, because then you can go back when they teachers or have a substitute or whatever and say, oh, well, these are the support the teacher's providing, and my child has to have these to be successful. And so it's just that's a huge piece that's happening frequently, is schools are saying, oh, it's best practice, so we do that for everyone. It's best practice. You don't need a support plan because we provide that at our school anyways. So those comments happen every day, and I'm like, nope, because you never know when the principal's going to change, when your teacher's going to change, when the world turns upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can happen so quick.
Yeah, it's overnight when it happens like that.
Yeah. I was going to say, to piggyback off of what you were saying earlier, Tiffany, about like, just go ahead and you kind of have to not trust the school walking into it. It's a harsh statement, but I think it is like what I'm about to say is probably pretty harsh too. But I don't think as special need parents or caregivers, we get that privilege to just trust anyone with our children. You have to be a detective and a police officer, a mother, an advocate. You have to be all of that at every second of every day. Sorry, the little one's in the background. Because unfortunately, it's just not something that was afforded to us in this life.
Yeah.
We don't get that privilege.
Yeah.
And that's something I wear very proudly on my chest, is with that, it's a medal of honor. Like, I'm going to advocate at any point that I need to, because I don't trust you initially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where it's like what you're saying is just take a verbal consent on something, and it's like, that's not what we can't do that. You have to have it in writing. We're not afforded that privilege to just accept what they're telling us.
Yeah.
And I'll advocate and call out the fact that most teachers, and especially teachers, they want what's best for kids. A lot of time the red tape, in my professional experience, is coming from higher than them. So a lot of times they're the mouthpiece because they're the ones talking to you. But a lot of times teachers have the best interests of kids, right? Like, that's why they did it. Teachers don't go in it for any other reason. And so I will kind of call that out, because I want to caution people to just understand that harsh reality. There are a lot of teachers that are advocating behind the scenes for your kids, and someone higher than them is the one that's saying no or doing, whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. Isn't that like every job though? I mean, like in healthcare, right. Like if I want to do something, I can't do something because insurance won't cover it. The so-and-sos that say so for everything say no. So it just is what it is, But yeah, I mean, I think all of the information that you gave, because this is just so not my space is definitely more medical. Kelby's space is more medical. So we're always interested in the education piece. And that is obviously, you have a very, large wealth of knowledge, but education is definitely your bread and butter. Yeah. So learning about that today, I'm sitting here thinking and I'll talk to you privately more, but I have some questions for you about my son.
There's so many things we learned about personally that we're like, oh, that's something we ought to know about. We didn't know.
Yeah. So I think going into this next piece, so what is the one thing, if you can pick one, if not, you can do a few, but what is something that you think the world ought to know about autism when it comes to education and advocating in education?
It's what we already said. You have rights. And you and your child have more rights than you even know. And so that's the one thing. You have rights. You do not have to take no for face value. in any space, not just education, but especially education. And that's definitely the number one. And then my number two is always put it in writing. That's literally my advice to everyone that I speak to. Put it in writing and don't take no for face value.
Great. You heard it from the expert's mouth. Those are really great things that we ought to know about. Well, Tiffany, let us know how we can find you on social media. I know you mentioned you're very active on social media. So what's your handle? How do we get plugged into InBloom
I'm really creative, and it's InBloom Advocacy on every platform.
Love it.
InBloom Advocacy. I use the hashtag heartwork because I believe all the work I'm doing is from the heart, and that's why I'm here. And so, but it doesn't matter what platform you find me on. InBloom Advocacy, you can look me up, Tiffany Yandle. You're going to find me. And so, yeah, I would definitely say connect. I'm not a gatekeeper. So if you ask me a question, I'm going to answer it. And so, yeah.
Well, thank you for that, for being available to just our community. We desperately need it. So
yeah,
we appreciate people who don't have like a direct connection to it that are always, like helping out the community. I'm always like, you're my kind of people. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We didn't get to touch on kind of like the political atmosphere right now surrounding IEP and 504s in this conversation. But Tiffany, if you're willing, we would love to have you back to where we could maybe talk about that a little bit more, because I know that it's kind of a up in the air topic right now for a lot of families.
Absolutely. Yeah. If your listeners are interested, we can definitely dig into the current climate of the politics and how it's going to affect all of us, but especially families who have kiddos with disabilities.
Yeah. So if you are listening, please drop a comment and we'll pass those along in our next interview with Tiffany so we can get those answered on the podcast. But Tiffany, it was so good to connect with you again today. We're excited to see you at the Connect Strong conference this month. We'll be able to see you in person there. And we'll stay connected with you on the social media platforms as well. We'll share your information in the information section of the podcast. So they'll have a direct link to InBloom there.
Great.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great week.
You as well.